the Growing for Market podcast.
If you're just responding to demand rather than planning for something, that leads to trouble. And it did for us in many ways. We didn't neglect the CSA program, but we prioritized meeting wholesale demand for a long period of time there. It worked until it didn't, but it became really important to recognize that the CSA, what has always been our foundation, and in order to grow, to really deepen those relationships that we've had for all these years, we needed to get away from this simple bread and butter crop mentality. We have definitely refocused. We have added diversity. We've added a lot more drop sites. We just have to explain to people about why this is and why we need these premiums in order to be able to compensate people, to edge some of the risk, and to be able to be around for another 30 years.
Hello and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Katie Kulla, your host and a writer for Growing for Market magazine. For 33 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
We know it's peak season. You're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free, instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt-together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production-scale high tunnels. Especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel-framed end walls, roll-up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using U.S. steel and working hands-on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons. Grow more food. Nifty Hoops.
Hello, everyone. Today I am talking with Jack Hedin and Abby Benson of Featherstone Farm in Rushford, Minnesota. Located on 225 acres alongside the beautiful Root River, Featherstone Farm was started in 1994 by Jack and his wife Jenny McHugh, when it was then named Featherstone Fruits and Vegetables. Today, Featherstone grows more than 95 varieties of certified organic fruits, vegetables, salad greens, and herbs. Planted and harvested largely by hand with some mechanical help, their fresh produce finds its way to kitchens across the upper Midwest. In 2025, they also added pastured pigs and management of an organic apple orchard to the list as well. Featherstone Farm's customers include retail stores, members of their community-supported agriculture program, and a regional produce wholesaler. And my second guest, Abby, manages the farm's production, harvest, and pastured pigs, and is part of the farm's new leadership team, as we will discuss. Welcome, Jack and Abby. I'm so glad to have you here today to talk about Featherstone Farm's history and its future.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. Our audience always likes to hear people's farming stories, and Featherstone Farm has been around for a while. Jack, as one of the founders, can you tell us a bit about the origin story of Featherstone Farm?
Yes, the origin of Featherstone Farm dates to 1994 when my wife My brother and I established a very, very small vegetable business at a rural land cooperative that my wife and I had been founding members on that year. 1994 was the culmination of 6 or 8 years of work, my wife and I, on vegetable farms, learning this trade from Massachusetts and Pennsylvania to California, Wisconsin, learning about organic vegetables and the type of farm business that we might want to run. And in the early 1990s, we were working at a farm in the Central Valley in California, but we're interested in returning to my family roots, which are here in southeast Minnesota. And as I mentioned, we were very interested in the idea of community and became involved in the formation of a rural land cooperative. So the original home of Featherstone Farm, Featherstone Fruits and Vegetables, was at a rural land cooperative that my wife and I were part of founding in January of 1994. And right away we got started with cover cropping, building a very, very primitive greenhouse, converting a tractor shed into a pack house. It was pretty seat of the pants, low budget, highly idealistic, but far vision. We had a big vision, and we're willing to work really, really hard for almost no money, and we were able to get it off the ground remarkably. And we have since moved. There's a lot, of course, a lot has happened since that time when we were effectively managing 5 acres of vegetables and doing everything by hand, going to farmers market locally and so forth. We've had great partners along the way, great employees, and a great fortune. So we are really lucky. We were in the right place at the right time in the mid-1990s when local and organic foods were both really taking off. And so we've just been really, really fortunate that we were around and put ourselves in a position to get lucky.
That is really good timing, actually, with the local food movement. And so Featherstone Farm has grown a lot since then, which we'll talk about. We will talk about that plenty. But Abby, I want to hear about your story and how you came to farming and specifically Featherstone Farm.
So I grew up in rural Iowa, north central Iowa, pretty much surrounded by cornfields, and didn't really know there was anything else out there agriculture wise. I really wasn't that connected with where my fruits and veggies came from. But I went to school in Decorah, Iowa at Luther, and there I studied environmental studies, and I got really interested in reading Aldo Leopold and Michael Pollan and just environmental philosophy and just learning so much about land use and farming. And, in Decorah, local farmers are kind of like celebrities. And so it was so exciting to go to the farmers market and like meet these farmers and kind of see what people are doing. And so when I graduated from college, I decided to stick around Decorah, and I got a job working for a small veggie farmer there at the time. And so I worked that summer, just really getting my feet wet, learning about growing vegetables. And I loved it. I loved the work, and I wanted to learn more. So I spent the next couple of years kind of just learning about different ways of farming in different places. I lived in Utah for a season and in Pennsylvania for a season before eventually coming back here to Minnesota. And I worked for some really great farmers, Lonnie and Sandy Dietz at Whitewater Gardens Farm for a year. And that was an awesome learning experience too. So for me, it was just a great opportunity to see a lot of different systems, and so fun because different farmers all approach similar problems in really different ways. So that was really exciting to me, and I was still hooked on the lifestyle of growing organic vegetables. So when a job came up at Featherstone with a position that had a little bit more management capabilities, I was really excited to get on here and to really learn from Jack and from the farm workers here. So that's kind of how I wound up in Rushford. And that was 2014, the winter of 2013. So I've been here ever since.
Nice. Okay. So let's do the jumping ahead now of the growth. Can one of you tell us more about Featherstone Farm as it exists today? Because it sounds like it's grown tremendously over the years from the original bootstrapping, 5 acres, jury-rigged greenhouse. Where are you at today in terms of the scope of what Featherstone Farm is doing?
So, this part of the country, southeast Minnesota, is what's called the driftless area of the upper Midwest. There is a certain area, southeast Minnesota, western Wisconsin, with many bluffs, river valleys, rolling terrain, and topographic variation. This is not pancake flat corn belt here. And so there are many microclimates, places where there are good conditions for growing vegetables and very poor conditions for growing vegetables. And coming here in 1994, 1995, I had some concept of this and the limitations of the growing potential at our original site and the Zephyr Valley Co-op, which was a low, wet, narrow site with very poor drainage, air drainage and soil drainage. And so right away in 1996, 97, right away we began looking for places to rent fields on higher ridges, places with better air drainage, different soil conditions, less deer pressure for one thing. And so already in the very early days, we were experimenting with diversifying microclimate locations and trying different ways of improving production where we could be more consistently in fields. We'd have less frost damage, certainly less deer damage. And we had been doing that for several years when in 2007, we experienced a 500-year flood event here in southeast Minnesota. Again, 20 inches of rain funneled into a narrow river valley, which essentially wiped all of our production off the map in the middle of August 2007. So right in the middle of the growing season. And this, in effect, forced my wife, by that time was less involved, but with that flood event in 2007, we had the need and the opportunity to relocate. And so to get an understanding of where the farm is right now, this was really the first critical pivot point where I had an opportunity in the midst of this crisis to evaluate a range of different places that we might relocate off of the land co-op, but places that would have better conditions for doing what we do, which is fresh market vegetables. And a lot of it is luck, but in retrospect, I did ask the right questions and sought the right kinds of locations and people. And we wound up, very fortunately, in the spring of 2008, buying a piece of farmland and relocating to an area 8 miles from our original site. That turns out to be the only really A plus growing site that I have ever encountered for horticultural crops or 260 bushel corn anywhere in the upper Midwest. This is something we could talk about, but we've had years of collaboration with a soil pedologist from the University of Minnesota who studied this, and we really are in a 1 in a million location here. And this is one of the keys to our success. We are, in my estimation, fresh market vegetables in a 4-season climate, in a place where it rains during the growing season, which is the eastern 2/3 of the country. You have to have an A plus site to do well. An A minus, B plus location is going to mean headaches that I think are virtually insurmountable this day and age with fresh market vegetables. So we are on 130 acres of what we farm is just the best condition that a person could imagine. Abby has done a great job building soil and protecting this resource, building out irrigation capacity, a whole range of things. But this day and age, one of the foundation level keys to our success and our existence, ongoing survival, frankly, is this A++ site that we're lucky enough to farm. We do have additional fields that are on the high ridge and in a 2-mile orbit, 4-mile orbit of this hub where we began, but they are much less important than this single large field that has these, as I say, perfect conditions. The two other real keys to our current survival and success that I think of, I continue to think and talk about for your listeners to understand. Getting started in the regional markets in the upper Midwest, particularly Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the mid-1990s, gave us access to what I still, in all my experience, and I travel and talk to a lot of growers all over the country, to me is the best produce market in the country. And we are incredibly lucky that we began selling to the food co-ops, this regional wholesaler I spoke about earlier, and the Whole Foods markets in Minneapolis, St. Paul in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We were already shipping crop 100 miles up the road from our farm to the Twin Cities. And this has been a real key to our success and still foundation level, what allows the farm to survive to this day and have such a bright future. And then the third and final real key to success here and defines the farm right now is this wonderful group of employees, the management team, of whom Abby is a huge part, but also people coming here from Mexico with H-2A visas. I think our first visa was probably in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006. We were already bringing people in the country with H-2A visas. And many of these people are still here, and many of them have, as they've aged out, as I've aged, everyone's aged, and now their children, and in some cases, grandchildren are working here at the farm now, 15, 20 years on. And that is just a real foundation, continuity of labor and people who have huge buy-in and huge dedication, bring a lot of mind, body, and soul, season in, season out. This is a foundation of what we do here. And Abby can speak to it, but to me, these are the three reasons that I think that our farm is as healthy and as successful as it's been.
Yeah, thank you for that overview of especially of your land. It sounds amazing. And so at this point, then how big, we know it's 225 acres. Help us see the scope of what you're doing and how much you're growing. Like how many members of the CSA, what kind of markets are you serving right now?
I'll speak to the high level thing, but then I think Abby kicked this to you on the actual farming component, which is Abby has a lot better sense of now than I do. Our CSA has fluctuated in the past 10 years between 12, 13, 1,400 members and as low as 900 at some years, but it's a large CSA. Many of them live 100 miles away in the Twin Cities metro, so we are very preoccupied with sending trucks and deliveries to multiple locations in the Twin Cities metro and throughout southeast Minnesota. We're serving 15 or 16 stores, retail storefronts, where our truck arrives at a Whole Foods Market store or a food co-op twice a week, early June through Christmas, essentially. Also a big logistical challenge, you can imagine. And then we're shipping also to wholesalers, this regional warehouse, co-op partners warehouse in St. Paul, and also the Whole Foods Market Regional Distribution Center in Chicago that does backhauls for us. So there are trucks that come to the farm and pick up 6, 8, 10 pallets once, twice a week and haul back to Chicago, certain crops on a wholesale basis. So there's pretty good size scope, diversity, and resilience then in a group of customers, CSA members, retail stores, and wholesalers. But on the farming part, Abby is the farmer, has been for years here, and can really speak much more to how we're producing stuff nowadays.
Yeah, I'd say so on the 200 some acres that we're managing and we're rotating through, we're growing about 135 of vegetables. And so the kind of the big crop families right now are the brassicas and the Apiaceae. We grow a lot of cabbage for wholesale, a lot of kale for wholesale. The broccoli is a really popular one for CSA and wholesale too, if we have enough. Carrots are a really big crop. We're pretty well known for those with our customers. And parsley, cilantro, and dill are also pretty big ones these days and growing. Sweet corn is another really, really big one for us. If we can keep the worms out, that's great. And we can sell a lot to those wholesalers, but we do what we can on that front. And then in the past several years, we've been putting up kind of a new high tunnel every year. Definitely Jack leading the charge on this, starting probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. We put up our first little high tunnel and kind of got a taste for the magic of growing in the off season and being able to get some fresh greens for our CSA members in the winter. I'm not sure if Jack mentioned that we do have spring, summer, and winter CSAs, and we're really trying to grow as much as we can in those kind of fringe seasons, especially in the winter, because we have really great storage capacity here on the farm. And so we can store a lot of veg for winter CSA members, but people really get excited for as much fresh green things as we can provide during that time of year. So when we got a little taste for winter spinach, we were kind of hooked and just kept putting up another tunnel every year. I think this is the first year for a while that Jack isn't managing a high tunnel project. So we have 3 big gutter connected high tunnels, 30 by 260, that we can grow mostly greens for the winter. Just starting to do a little bit of experimenting with some supplemental heat so we can kind of expand our crop mix away from just spinach and some of the things that are a little more cold hardy. But yeah, that's kind of the overview of the growing side of things.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm impressed with the year-round CSA in Minnesota. That's, out here in Oregon where I am, yes, people do that, but it's a whole different climate. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer.
Hey farmers, weed control got you down?
Can't take it anymore.
With roots in hell. Weeds are the biggest threat to our way of life today. Wednesday, August 20th, Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day comes to Iowa at the ISU Horticulture Research Station in Ames. 12 cultivators and side-by-side weed killing action. Extensive field demos, machinery companies from all over the country, and farmers from around the Midwest.
What?
Learn what cultivator is right for you and how to adjust it for your condition. See the future now.
Camera-guided hitches, autonomous weeding robots, electric cultivating tractors, two-wheel tractors, and more.
Cultivators for both row crops and specialty crops. Good Lord.
A morning trade show to meet cultivator companies and other ag suppliers. Education sessions on key topics and lunch. Lunch.
Get your tickets online at thelandconnection.org and see the full lineup. The Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day in Ames.
Be there and send weeds straight back to hell.
And now, back to the show. So what kind of storage facilities do you have to be able to store that kind of volume for that size CSA? What have you built?
So I mentioned before one of these huge pivots that occurred in 2007 when we were relocated to this location, and we're able to put up a pair of buildings here that are really state-of-the-art facilities for packing and processing fresh market stuff. Not storage crops so much at that time, but fresh market. Because for the first 15 years of the farm business, we were really driven by seasonal shipping of largely what I think of as summer fruits, tomatoes, melons, peppers, sweet corn is in that group and so forth. And we'd have a fall crop of winter squash. We'd have some certain number of root crops, a certain amount of fall cabbage. But we did not have the facilities or the mindset around storage in general. And so starting sometime in the early probably 2011, 2012, having been here in this location for 2-3 years, we began to recognize the opportunities of off-season sales of crops harvested in October, stored in winter storage facilities for 3, 4, 5 months. And we had good mentors on this at the time in eastern Wisconsin that had gotten really good at storing, in particular, cabbage and carrots. These are two real big ones for us now. And so we began a pivot probably in that 2012, 2013 era where we built up large storage facilities, big winter storage coolers. The one can hold probably in the range of 450, 500 bins, 800-pound bins of carrots.
That's big.
Smaller cooler can probably hold 200, maybe 225s in that range. So we're able to put up, I think, Abby, it's in the neighborhood of 120 tons of carrots every fall. I think, is that the goal, 120, 140 maybe net by now? I'm not even sure.
Up to, 450 bins, I think we've done in the past. Kind of fluctuates depending on growing conditions.
I think we're in that range of 600-800 bins of combinations of root crops and cabbage and winter squash that we're storing in facilities here on the farm. And we've just upgraded, actually, the root facility with better climate controls for moisture, humidity, and for air quality. This is such a big deal with the nature of the air, ethylene gas, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, other these specs for really getting a good carrot, a carrot that tastes 90% as good on April 1st as it did when it was picked on November 1st, right? That's our goal right now for our wholesale customers and CSA members. And so we're wholesaling carrots, we're wholesaling cabbage right into March, April, harvested in the fall, stored in these optimal conditions, beets, other crops that Abby can talk about. We've really worked on that. So it's not just it is largely a CSA driven enterprise, but we also have quite a lot of winter wholesale that takes advantage of these packing facilities, the distribution network, and these creating year-round work to retain great employees like Abby and the other leaders, the other people that have been here for 10, 15 years.
Hey, just a note for our listeners, if things sound different, we've been having typical like rural dweller trying out internet stuff. So Jack and Abby are now in one room. They may just sound a little different than when they were in separate rooms. So bear with us. Okay. So Jack and Abby, I noticed we've been talking about the CSA, and it sounds like the CSA has been a part of your farm for a long time, but on your farm blog, you wrote at the end of 2024 that was a year that you were, quote, pivoting to CSA, which I'm very curious really what that means on a farm that has been a CSA farm. The post also contained a lot of really interesting metrics and very transparent discussion of your own assessment of the season. So that's kind of like a big question, but I'm just curious what that meant to you, to the farm, to pivot in that way, and kind of like the purpose of sharing this. Let's see, I just want to describe it so our listeners know what I'm talking about. Like, I feel like with our CSA, we were always like, let's put exactly the best face forward all the time. And they often didn't, like, even when we told them about our challenges, they were like softened. This felt just like they were sitting at the table with you at a farm meeting. Like, no, not that there was anything really negative, but it just felt like, here's the real deal. So if you can just speak to those things, I'm just so curious about that approach and just your overall approach to that CSA and the communication and prioritizing things.
So I would say that really the origin of this whole mentality for me goes back to this idea of rural community and consensus building, just radical transparency, being in the same room, talking with people about what's really going on, and accountability to people side by side, whether they're your neighbors or community members or shareholders or customers, whatever it may be. This has been a really, really big deal for me for a long time. And it also helps that in the early going, we were such a small CSA program that I really knew most people by name. Some of those folks from 1996, 97 seasons are still with us all these years later. And so when I think about 1,400 members, I think of a handful of faces. I think of people that were farmers market customers in the day, or that were picking strawberries, the spring of 2007, the year we had the flood, and helped us through that transition out of that disaster, that flood loss, 2007, into this new era. These are people that I feel, for whatever reason, very close to. I feel like they are our closest members and have been since day one in many ways. And at the same time, what happened, I think, in that part of that transition that I spoke of before in the early 2012, 2014, as we pivoted towards wholesale crops and began more winter wholesale, storage crops, carrots, we also really upgraded the amount of wholesale that we were doing to certain customers. The growth in demand from stores and wholesalers between 2010 and 2015 far outpaced the growth in demand from CSA members during that time. And so naturally, because we were in the business of responding to demand, we weren't advertising, we didn't have a business plan. This is, by the way, one of the really key takeaways I hope all of your listeners perhaps relate to in their own experience. If you're just responding to demand rather than planning for something, that leads to trouble. Right. And it did for us in many ways. We didn't neglect the CSA program, but we prioritized meeting wholesale demand for a long period of time there. And it worked in many ways. And we succeeded in building this robust winter wholesaling thing. And we really locked down a lot of these markets that Abby had talked about, selling kale and the types of crops that we really want to retail customers, to stores in the Twin Cities Metro and elsewhere. But we didn't grow the winter program, and we didn't grow the diversity. In some ways, we backslid a little bit on crops. We tried to simplify during that period of time. I wrote extensively to our CSA membership and explained that what we were really going to do was run what I called at that time a bread and butter crop CSA. We were going to grow a lot of the basics that most people want in a box week in, week out, but not a lot of experimental, unusual, marginal things that a person could easily get at the farmer's market or grow in their own backyard. So we narrowed the range of options. It was a strategic decision in many ways, and it worked for a period of time, but it worked until it didn't. And for various reasons, I think post-pandemic in particular, for a lot of other things we could get into, but it became really important to recognize that the CSA, what has always been our foundation, and in order to grow, to really strengthen those, deepen those relationships that we've had for all these years, we needed to get away from this simple bread and butter crop mentality. Abby certainly running field production showed the capacity to add more crops, manage, keep more balls juggling in the air at once, rather than just a fewer number that we thought we could handle 10, 15 years ago. So we have definitely refocused. We have added diversity. We've added a lot more drop sites, but we've continued this arc of I think of this radical transparency, really telling people what's really going on here. Because if you've been in this business, as many of your listeners have been for a long time, you recognize this tension between telling good news stories that you feel like you need in order to create that enthusiasm and that buy-in from customers, but also the reality of the situation, which is that hailstorms happen and black rot. Abby remembers that in 2016, we had a xanthomonas outbreak that nearly put us out of business. A range of these things happen, particularly in areas where it rains during the growing season. So we need to explain that to people. And ultimately, and this is another critical point for me that I've been talking about a lot as part of this pivot in the last 2 years, not only charge an organic premium for what we grow, because it's certified organic, it's going to get an X percentage over conventional crop, but also charge what I now talk about as a local premium. Because it will always be more expensive on a 5-year average to grow something in a 4-season climate where it rains than it would to grow it in a dry, arid climate in California, in the arid West, and ship it across the country, right? There needs to be a local premium as well as a organic premium on pricing. And this is where that kind of a real deep dive communication with members and customers of all kinds really counts. I think that we just have to explain to people about why this is and why we need these premiums in order to be able to compensate people, to edge some of the risk, and to be able to be around for another 30 years. So that's my perspective on it. How do you see it, Abby?
I mean, I think that's always been something that Jack has kind of led the charge on, and that has worked out for us. And it seems like the customers do really appreciate it. And there's definitely, like you were saying, Katie, there's a tendency to want to just paint a rosy picture and just share the positive things. But I know when people come here for events, or even people I run into in the community, people remember what Jack taught them about rain and how that affects vegetables and what that might mean for the upcoming season. And people don't know about that because it's not a normal thing you come across in day-to-day conversation. But I feel like Jack's done a really good job of educating our CSA members in that way. And I don't know, maybe that's a reason why a lot of them do keep coming back, and they're here to support us as a farm and the farm community more than just wanting a discount on local vegetables or something like that. And so I think that's beneficial for us and for, the Minnesota growing community in general.
Mm-hmm. You two are making me feel almost grateful for our seasonal droughts. I've always known that farming with summer rain would be very different, but yeah, you're painting a picture of those challenges for sure.
I'll just take 30 seconds on this. Again, I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with this. In 2007, we had an acute event, right? 20 inches of rain in 36 hours, devastating, wiped us out. But in my estimation, in 30 years of doing this, it's the chronic wet events that are far more destructive to what we do, for a whole host of reasons, mainly crop disease, but disruption of everything that Abby does with the planting cycles, the wave succession plantings, all of this, right? When it's wet and we're off that schedule, as it is right now, when fields set wet for 3 days, when the dew point is high, foliage doesn't dry out, you get disease racing through cabbage or winter squash, melons, things get sick in wet areas. And that is the fundamental problem that we faced over and over. And it's a mounting problem with destabilized climate, the chronic moisture, not the acute moisture.
You said that you're dealing with one of those times right now. What's going on right now? This is mid-July 2025.
I feel like it hasn't been too bad this year. The rain's been, maybe once a week we've been having rain, but like Jack said, we have this really, really great soil here where we're at. So if we have 2 days, usually that's enough that our soils are going to drain and we could be out working again. So this year, so far, I mean, it could turn quickly. Next week's forecast looks like it could be rain every day. That would be a problem for us. But last spring was a really good example of how this can be really difficult for us. In the early spring and early summer, it never stopped raining. And a big example that comes to mind for me is prepping ground for carrots. We do a lot of cover cropping here. Going into the fall and winter, I try to have everything cover cropped. And so if I have maybe a rye cover crop out there in the fall in a future carrot field, if I can't properly mow, till in, and break down with enough time that cover crop before my carrots that are going to get planted, the next June, July, it's very difficult to be able to plant a crop like carrots into a fine seed bed when I can't break down cover crops. So along with foliar disease, just being able to prep fields in time can be really, really challenging. So far this year, it's going okay though.
Okay, knock on wood. Let's shift topics a little bit. I saw that you have 2 certifications for the farm, the Fair Food Program and Real Organic Project. Can you speak to what those 2 certifications mean to you and why you chose those specifically for Featherstone?
Well, we've always been interested in labor, fair labor. It's been a bedrock principle for us. We were part of a very similar pilot project in 2009, 10, and 11, I'm guessing it was, with the Agricultural Justice Project, where we were certified fair trade through a pretty extensive review. This has come back around again now. I think Abby can talk more about the modern program right now, which I think is a much higher, much better program in many ways. But yeah, this idea that organic farmers are automatically better employers and better with a whole range of issues with farm employment is not necessarily true in my experience. So we want to make sure that people recognize we're not just merely certified organic, but that we're using real organic principles, things that are about improving the environment rather than just removing traces of chemicals from finished products going to stores. And just holding ourselves to really high standards across the board with labor and soil and environment.
Yeah, the Fair Food one has been really important for me. I've put a lot of work on that in the last year. And that is a program that kind of came out of the coalition of Immokalee workers in Florida. And it's a farm worker driven organization that works to improve the lives of farm workers here in the US. And it's a pretty great organization that also works with corporations who are buying a lot of vegetables from farms. So there are Whole Foods for sure is one that we work with, but there are other buyers that commit to working with farms that are Fair Food certified to try to elevate and support farmers that are committed to that. And so for us, it's been a really awesome organization. They come out once a year and do workers' rights training for all the workers. And then they do individual interviews with every person on the farm and really are making sure that people are being treated well. And I think that's really important for me, especially in the world today, just to show our customers that we're doing right by our workers and we're really trying to take care of people because, yeah, like Jack said, it's not just a given. And we couldn't do what we do without these folks who come here and both from Mexico and here locally. So I think that's just really important for us to take care of people.
Agreed. I mean, if we're in it for the community, they are part of the community, right?
Big time.
An important part of
Big
it.
Time.
At the peak of this season, how many people are employed on the farm?
Yeah, so at the peak of the season, we have close to 50 workers here, and about 32 of them are coming from Mexico with H-2A visas.
So do they come for about 9 months? Am I remembering correctly for what the visa allows?
Yeah, I think the visa allows 10 months, and probably our longest term guys, the leadership guys, are here for probably 9 months. Yeah,
We've also been tempted to expand and create multiple waves of people. So we have separate postings, I think, now in the fall of the year for people to wash and pack carrots all winter. We cannot get local people to do these jobs, I'm afraid to say. So there are times of year still where we have no one here with visas, but those times are only a couple of months in the spring now, very, very late winter, early spring now.
Yeah. What is your community like where you are? Are you near any sizable town, or are you pretty much out there? Because that's something we talk about a lot on the podcast, and something my husband and I are very aware of is, what you're physically near is going to affect your labor pool a lot.
Yeah, so we are located in a town of about 1,800 people that is halfway between two pretty good-sized cities, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and Rochester, Minnesota. But Rochester is the home of the Mayo Clinic, which is, growing at an unbelievable rate. And even though it's nearly an hour's drive away, there are people from Rushford that will commute to Rochester for Mayo Clinic jobs. And that definitely impacts the labor market here for sure. We still do have a relatively healthy rural economy in this area I spoke of before, the driftless area of southeast Minnesota. So we're very fortunate in that way that there are small town hardware store, grocery store right here in our town, independent, locally owned businesses right here in our town, farm equipment repair, a range of things like this that's still very vital in our area. But I worry about those things long term as agriculture consolidates and more people leave communities like this to go to Rochester, La Crosse to work.
Yeah, I can relate to that. We're about an hour from Portland, Oregon, but there's for sure people who live in our community who are doing that drive every day. And it definitely changes things. Abby, question for you. You manage both the vegetable production and now this new pastured pig operation. I'm curious about what approach the farm is taking to balancing crop and livestock production, and also why bring this on? It sounds like you all have plenty going on, but what was the impetus there of bringing on animals? And is this totally new to have animals on the farm, or just a new iteration of something?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my time here, it's the first time we've had animals. I don't know if no animals.
We had pigs in the day.
Okay, so back in the day.
Co-op days, in the land co-op days.
Okay, I know. There's a long history here. Certainly, it seems like everybody dabbles in pigs and chickens at some point, right?
Yeah, so this was my first time working with the livestock at all. And actually, it was kind of brought to me by another farmer in our area, Nettle Valley Farm. She was doing a really amazing job doing pastured pigs. And she had a big list of customers who were like, this is the only pork they're going to eat because she did such a good job with raising those pigs and they tasted great. I was a customer of hers for many years and she had to get out of the business of it. And so she was kind of approaching me for a couple of years. She's been kind of talking to me about this because we're kind of uniquely set up, or maybe not uniquely. A vegetable farm in general is kind of uniquely set up because we have that waste stream of cold produce coming out of the warehouse. And so she was actually coming here and getting seconds tomatoes or whatever fruiting crops that her pigs might like. And you can really reduce your feed cost by supplementing with these veggies that come out of the warehouse. So Dana really thought we would be pretty perfectly set up to work that into our system. So we decided this year to go for it. We were kind of looking for different ways to diversify a little bit, diversify apart from the vegetables, with the apple orchard too. That's kind of a different conversation. But luckily I had Dana as a mentor to really walk me through, and she helped me make the whole business plan. We laid out the pasture and where the pigs are living and all of that. So I think that if I had to start from scratch and do all the research and figure it out all myself, that probably would have been too much for me to do. But having Dana, I felt really pretty confident that we could figure it out. And I guess the other part of that is, running veggie production and running harvest with all of these different crops on all of these acres just in itself is a really complicated task and takes a lot of organization. And so I'm just so thankful that I have an awesome team that I work with to get all of this done. And I think over the years working with Jack has really set a great example for all of us about delegating and trusting people to take on projects and following through, but really not grasping the reins super tight to be the point person on every little thing. So I think for me, that's the big thing that makes it work, is that I have a guy that I really, really trust that manages irrigation, and he makes the decisions and he runs that. And I don't have to be thinking about that on a day-to-day basis. I also have a new crop manager this year who has some experience with animals and is really excited about the pigs. And so I've been able to hand over a lot of the day-to-day, more detailed stuff to her. And so for me, that's been the biggest thing, is figuring out how to delegate a lot of these tasks to other people, work with people's strengths, and just share the management so that we can try to juggle it all and do a good job.
I think that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is about your management structure. Because this is something I really want to hear about. Going back to this blog, which has some juicy, good things on it, in addition to refocusing on the CSA, and then this year adding the pasture pigs and the orchard. The other big change is that it sounds like at the end of 2024, Jack, you officially passed on daily leadership of the farm to a team of folks, including Abby, and you are now semi-retired, retired from the farm. I'd love to hear about that whole process, because this is something a lot of farms of your generation are either at or approaching. You know, the big question is, do I sell the farm? Do I dissolve the farm? Do I pass it on as is to existing people? How did you all navigate that on all sides?
So there are two big background things I think that I will point to. One is mentality. You know, what I brought to this when I got started in farming, which was idealism and commitment to, you've heard me talk about consensus decision making, and the idea of including many voices and many perspectives in decisions, large and small. That was my instinct in the thing. But I also had 0.0 understanding of business management or other things, or even the nature of the business itself. So background number one to this current leadership structure is idealism and lack of understanding of, and starting from a clean slate, in other words, right? Because I didn't have a lot of presuppositions or bad habits, say. The other really important background to this leadership structure is this idea that only became clear to me probably 10 years ago, which is that Featherstone Farm is a farm, but it is a farm business that is vertically integrated and has really three different industries. I speak with our customers about this as something that and again, your listeners may understand this in many ways, but talking to somebody at the farmer's market, I explain it that in California, in our food system as it works, there are the packing houses that run the show, that contract with growers that don't really have anything to do with the crop once it's harvest ready. And then the pack houses make, their lists available to wholesalers, and then the distribution world kicks in. So farming, storage, packing, warehousing, and distribution are three, not just different parts of the business, they are three different industries in this modern day and age. They're different worlds. And as a society, as an economy, we've gotten really, really, really good at each of these discrete, disconnected worlds and integrating them only around the margins. Well, a farm business like us, a farm business like ours that is doing all three, is got to have a management structure and an organizational chart that is capable of making decisions and integrating these three parts of an operation in a way that works, that is functional. So this all was a work in progress. This was all hashed out. This was some really ugly times here. I'll admit it, before Abby arrived, I think, early 2010s, 2012s, when we were growing 15, 20% every year. We had all these employees running around. I had a consensus mentality. Just give people a long leash and everyone will do their best. And there was no accountability. There was no real focus on who was doing what. There were no job descriptions, all of this. This was a crisis in early 2010s. And I'll never forget, we had a CSA manager who came who had a MBA from University of Minnesota and used this term org chart for the first time. And I had no idea what it was. And that began probably 2010, 2011, I'm guessing, this decade-long effort to clearly define what jobs are happening at the farm, how they're related or not related, who should be responsible for them, how to empower people to do those jobs, but also hold them accountable so that other people in the team, are able to count on harvest delivering crop in a certain level of preparation so that the warehouse manager can take over, do his or her job and pass on to distribution, and the salespeople, know what's coming through the pipeline. All this integration, this is a very difficult thing. And it really has been my preoccupation for the last 10, 15 years. And as I've focused more and more and more on this idea of general management of the company, I've been very fortunate to be able to turn over, huge chunks of this management responsibility to someone like Abby, who has run the farm operation for years now. And I just don't think about it that much. And I end up spending more of my time worrying about truck drivers or warehouse pack standards or these other things that, I didn't get into it 25, 30 years ago thinking they were important parts of it, but turn out to be every bit as important or more important. Administrative work. Who's doing e-verifies? Who's filling out all of the I-9 forms without exception? And are we certain that those are being filed correctly? This kind of thing, right? This is why the idea of a general manager has grown in importance in my mind. And so we are now in a place where we have a farm production manager, a warehouse manager, a distribution manager, a financial manager. We have a CSA manager, and then we have a general manager that integrates all of those folks and oversees them. And so I've been able to step back. And right now it's holding. We'll see. I have a lot of hope and a lot of optimism, having worked with the majority of these folks for 10 plus years, 15 years almost. So I'm very hopeful. But that work culture, that understanding of roles, responsibilities, and that proper balance between empowering people and holding them accountable. That's been a 10-year learning curve for me, and it's a big deal.
Yeah, Abby, do you want to comment on what the experience has been like for you to arrive in one capacity and work into, basically being a key part of keeping the farm running?
You've seen a lot of it evolve.
Yes, I have seen some different iterations of this leadership structure over the years and have gotten more and more involved as time has gone on. Feels like we're at a pretty healthy place right now, which feels good. What do I have to add to that? I feel like Jack did a good description of it. I think what he said about having really clear descriptions and accountability on things has been really important and has caused friction over the years. If people don't have clear guidelines on what their job is and what they're doing, it's easy to overstep and go into one of these other realms where somebody else is in charge of that. And there's just a lot of places where you could butt heads with people in an integrated business like this, where I think a lot of other farms, the farm owner is the farmer and is like pulling the strings on all of these things. And that is a lot of pressure and a lot of work hours really for one person to try to keep everything running. So I think it's probably the reason that we are still here through all the changes and Jack being able to step back is that we have a lot of people involved running all of these different pieces. And so it's not reliant on just one person. And now, we're in a whole new world right now with Jack stepping back and Nathan Manful is the GM. And we have a great team. This leadership team that we have has been working together for over 10 years now. And I think we all really trust each other and work really well together. And we can approach each other if we have issues and work things out. And so far it's going really well. So time will tell.
That's great. I love hearing these stories of farms that reach that level of sustainability, that they are creating careers for the next generation. I think that's maybe one of the best pillars we could hope for a farm's sustainability.
Well, I think maybe one thing to add to that is just that because it's not, one person who has to be in charge of everything, I think everybody has a better work-life balance is the buzzword that everybody throws around. But, people have kids and families. And I think Jack has built a business that has really allowed us to be able to take the time that we need. People can be with their families and not be here 24/7. And so I think that's another important part of what has made this work and has allowed people to stay around.
Yeah, maybe more of an actual job instead of an all-consuming job and personal life endeavor, the way it is for some farmers.
And was here for 20 years. It was here for at least 20 years for me. The 7 day a week, 365 day a week, a year thing. We've been there, done that. But I would not wish that on my worst enemy. If what we're doing in organic, local agriculture, if this is going to succeed, and we're certainly not trying to grow it all, but if it's replicable, if there's going to be more farms like Featherstone Farm or like Water Gardens or others, there has to be a work-life balance that makes sense for people. Because only some people are crazy enough, like I was, my wife and I, for 20 years of doing it as a labor of love. It sounds good, but it doesn't always pay the bills, and it takes a big toll on human beings. And I think we have grown past that for the last 6-8 years here. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I have also had that experience. It's rough. And I honestly don't know that younger generations are up for that. I think they are smarter in some ways. So if we're going to keep this organic local scene going, I don't think we can expect the new generation of farmers to do that.
It's not reasonable to expect anyone to do this. It's not reasonable. They went to...
No.
It's not wise. It's not sustainable.
I think we actually learned a lot from our employees on that count. They would want this balance. And we were like, but I don't understand. We don't have balance. Why do you need balance? And then at some point it clicked, like, maybe we should also have balance rather than begrudging our younger employees the balance that they rightfully deserved. Okay, so looking to the future, what long-term challenges do you anticipate for Featherstone Farm, and what kind of steps are you taking to meet those? And I'd love to hear from both of you, from your different perspectives.
I worry a lot about the challenge of food system consolidation, the way in which decision-making, food sourcing, the whole industry, these industries that I've talked about have been consolidating. And, I think Walmart sells 25% of all the groceries consumed in the United States. If you add Kroger and Safeway and a handful of others, Albertsons, there's just a handful of really, 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 really big players. And that, to me, at least from my limited perspective, as I've seen this evolve for 40 years, since my first farm job, when there were a lot of regional warehouses, a lot of independent places, there were more actors, there were more outlets, there was more local business activity rather than centralized decision-making out of Austin, Texas, or Chicago or whatever. This seems to me to be a really big problem and a huge challenge for us moving forward. So I do not know what the solution is. I think this is at some level part of the pivot to CSA in 2024, because honestly, we have a more of a relationship with these CSA members, and we can, as we discussed before, send newsletters or sit people down as though in their kitchen table and say, this is why this is working for us or is not working, and what we need to do to change the things that are not working so that we can be on for another 30 years and feed your children and your grandchildren, as well as our own children, grandchildren. Those employees from Mexico can have a future with their families here in the United States rather than 3,000 miles away. All that. This is why we're moving forward in this direction. It's much harder to do that when you have a handful of really powerful buyers that don't really, frankly, care as much about those things and are more interested in price and quality and other things, service, consistency. So I think that consolidation for me is by far the biggest challenge. There are some other focused issues like land access and labor markets. Food safety seems to be a big problem to me, big challenge, trying to make, although this new group seems to be doing really, really well with that and overcoming what 3-4 years ago seemed to me to be a really, really big challenge to what we're doing. But that would be my perspective. Consolidation is a challenge.
Yeah, I think that the only things I would add that really affect, my job is doing the production side is, of course, weather is constantly a challenge, and what that's caused by is one thing or another, but it's always going to rain. So just constantly focusing on what we can do to improve our soil and be as resilient as we can. It's hard to think about the things that you have very little control over, and weather is something that we really just can't control at all. So building soil, growing the healthiest transplants that I can, figuring out how to grow under cover a little bit. You can only do so much in that front. And then, of course, Jack mentioned labor. Labor definitely is one that I think continues to be a challenge. And so, whatever we can do I'd really like to try to see if we could get some of our visa workers here on green cards so they can have their families here and be working year round, because they really are already 10, 15-year workers, and we'd like to have them here as long as they can continue working. And that's a lot more sustainable if they're not going back and forth, and if they have their kids here with them. And also investing in local employees, pretty much any local people who are excited about farming and want to learn. Like, we have some longtime people who came from this area. And so I really try to figure out what people's passions are, what people are excited about, and try to figure out how to keep them engaged and, pay people enough that they can make a life here. But that's definitely something to think about for the future.
Okay, well, let's end on a maybe pragmatic or inspiring note. I always like to ask my guests, since our audience is either direct market farmers or people who want to be, if you have any tips or tricks that you can share. Like, what's one of the best things? You have a long history, so you may have a lot of these, but what's one of the best things you and your team have done for the farm so far or recently that you just want to put out there to share? It can be something like a great tool or a great approach or a decision, just something somebody can maybe try out this next season.
Well, this is probably a nuts and bolts question, and I'm going to give you a really high-level answer. But I think you use the term approach. To me, the approach that really matters, that I would say is most fundamental. I'm sure that Abby and others at our farm share this, but this idea that what we do is so dynamic in direct market and direct-to-consumer. There are so many things that change, whether it's pandemics or labor markets with immigration or food safety or orchards or pig operations coming up for sale nearby that we've relied on, a whole range of different things, right? 1 year kale is the hottest thing since sliced bread. The next year it's kabocha squash. We are in a dynamic environment. And so this mentality, this approach that, as much as I hate to say it, that it's never good enough. You always have to be thinking about the next thing, the next approach, the next tweak, the next improvement. And this is one of the things that keeps it exciting and vital and a big challenge, keeps it fun in many ways, but means that there's really no down season. There's not a lot of downtime. But I just think that any operation, any business in this day and age, in this industry, has got to be nimble and got to be thoughtful and got to be adaptable and foresee things and take advantage of opportunities or create opportunities to move forward. So not quite a nuts and bolts thing. You got a couple of nice new seeders, maybe, as you could talk about that more to the point for farming.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly nuts and bolts things for farming, but I just thinking about it as I'm sitting here, I kind of think something that really comes to mind for me is just focusing on work culture, on delegation, on communication, on really getting your teams and your systems in place. Not just drive yourself crazy chasing around the next carrot field or the next weeds you need to pull. Like, I think having really taken time to focus on work culture and getting your teams really working well together goes a really long way. So for me, I think that's been huge and something that's definitely always a ongoing process. But I think we've come a long way with that in the time that I've been here.
Now, I would just add that this was as relevant at Featherstone Farm when we had 6 employees as when we have 50 or 60. The idea of being really clear with people and having clear expectations, clear accountability, and recognizing that accountability is a two-way street. It's not just that you are going out there to weed that field of carrots to this spec and in this amount of time, but also that if it's hot or if you need a shade structure or if you need some different tool or something fixed at your housing so that you can sleep at night, that the farm is accountable to you as well. It's a two-way street, and maintaining that relationship is really critical. Yeah, 100%. Whether you got 2 people or 20 working or 200.
That seems like a really good note to end on, but is there anything else you want to share with our audience while we're together?
I admire and encourage, and it just takes my breath away to think that people this day and age are still getting into this, as my wife and I did 30 plus years ago. It is a leap of faith, and it is a hope for the future. And I don't want to sound discouraging with the challenges and the complexities and all this and that. I just think that there is opportunity, and I'm just really grateful that your listeners are giving it a try.
Wonderful. Abby, how can people find you or Featherstone Farm if they want to connect further or learn more? What's the best way?
Yeah, you can always go check out our website. It's just featherstonefarm.com. And then we're on Instagram at Featherstone Farm MN. And we're on Facebook. I guess I'm not Featherstone Farm in Minnesota. You'll find it if you look it up.
Thank you, Jack, Abby, so much for sharing your valuable time in the summer season. It was really great hearing about your farm and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and information from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and you haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never get billed. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 per year, you get a year of the magazine, plus over 150 back issues from the last 15 years. Head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.